right, folks, our next presenter this evening is, deep from the heart of Texas, Lark from Texas. Are you there, Lark?
I am indeed, Gary. How are you, Mr.
Now, of course, I was lying to the audience. I knew for a fact you were there because we were carrying on some banter before you came live, and how is the weather in Texas right now? I spent a little bit of time outside early this morning, and it was beautiful here in Virginia. I think Texas, you guys are just so far south, it's got to be 180 degrees, and it's absolutely sweltering and terrible down there, ain't it?
Well, it was like napalm in the morning here. I have to say, Gary, it was actually a bright, sunny day. It continues to be, in contrast to last month, in which I indicated it was quite rainy and a bit chilly outside.
Well, one of the nice things about doing these marathon broadcasts, I hope my wife is not listening to this, but, this gave me an excuse not to have to mow the lawn and till the garden today. What was on your honey-do list?
Well, I have to tell you, I'm lucky. I didn't have much at all. I really have just my 2 dogs. I will tell you this, interesting observation. We recently changed lawn service because, of course, I live in suburbia. I'm a classic suburbanite, a rather dull fellow, and generally it's on Wednesdays that the lawn is mowed. However, it's now Saturdays, so they just finished mowing the yard about 2 hours ago. And of course it's noisy and invasive, etc. But I want you to know, for whatever it's worth, that I looked outside and I saw a 60-year-old man mowing my yard. And I had become accustomed to seeing Mexican or Mexican-American people mowing the yard. Isn't that interesting?
It is. It is.
He was kind of like me and you, Gary.
Well, yeah, because
that
I kind of resemble that remark. Some 60-year-old geezer out there with a cigar and a beer in his hand trying to mow the lawn.
Well, that's me too. However, I have been able to escape from such drudgery in deference to other types of drudgery, as you would probably understand. And like many people,
I shouldn't get you too far off topic. We could sit here and banter back and forth, but I know you've got a message that you want to deliver, and you delve into some areas that many out there, I'm sure, are going to find interesting. To me, it's kind of over. It's a little over my head because, frankly, I'm an old Southern boy with an IQ about equal to your shoe size, and it's sometimes hard for me to follow these upper concepts. But, you seem to be very attuned to linguistic tricks that are played on the masses that I probably, fall victim to every day, and it just kind of goes right over my head because, like I say, my IQ is about equal to my shoe size.
Well, we all fall victim to that. And by the way, remind me, I'll send you a link to a pill you can take for that problem, Gary.
Oh, it's not that blue pill my wife keeps trying me to take, is it?
This one actually will lower your IQ.
Really?
Because it is said that the lower the IQ, the better that you're going to be able to make it in this world. And I think there's probably some truth to that.
Well, no wonder I've been doing so well lately.
Remember the song "Shotgun Willie"?
Well, I'm not sure that I'm really doing it I'm not sure I'm really doing that well. I think it might just be that I'm so damn stupid I don't realize how bad I am.
Well, and that's really probably not so bad. That's really not so bad. I think language gets us in trouble.
Sometimes living in ignorance is not such a bad thing. But we've got so many living in ignorance around us that you sometimes wonder, in the world of the blind, the fellow with one eye can be king. And sometimes I look around and I say, these guys are blind.
I know, and I know a lot of us feel that way. But the truth is that we're all trapped by our own education, our own indoctrination. And in a sense, we're living in bondage. But there's a very real bondage all around us, and I call that encroachment. And other people have other words for that, but there is no doubt there seems to be a culling of the herd afoot, and it's silly to ignore it. But I thought today I might identify who the criminals in our midst might be. Because if you recall, in my inaugural presentation, as well as last month's presentation here on United We Strike, I stated that socialism equals gangsterism equals slavery. So I wanted to perhaps divulge who it is these gangsters might be. Who are the enemies of the people?
Is the guy's name Guido?
He is most certainly one of them, if not many of them.
And he's got this buddy named Louis the leg breaker.
That's right.
He works for the IRS.
That's right. I don't know anybody named IRS, as you understand. Nor do I know anybody named Texas. Although I must tell you, I say that I am not from Texas, which is true. I only arrived in Texas in about 1969. But I am most definitely in Texas, because if we examine that word Texas, or Tessian, it is actually from the Caddo Amerindian word for friend or friendship. So when I say that I'm Lark in Texas, or that I'm lit for United We Strike, what I mean to say is that I am indeed Lark, because it is the oldest family nickname in my life, and I use it to honor my late younger brother. But I come in friendship. So I really enjoy being a part of this marathon series, because I have an opportunity to interact with people I wouldn't ordinarily. And it allows me to examine the commonalities of language that perhaps we can learn to adopt so that we can, in fact, unite. As I see it, I think it's almost an impossibility in most cases, simply because the language that we employ keeps us apart too often, more than it unites us.
Well, you know, there are many dialects of the English language. I mean, we had some fellows on early today on the marathon that, you know, got this real funny accent that come from someplace in Europe, which I understand is a little north of New Jersey. And, you know, I'm not sure, but that the subtle nuances in the various regional dialects is not part of the problem. How would you address that?
Well, I think that's certainly true. And then, too, remember, for just about any word, if you were to go to a dictionary and look the word up, very often we find a multiplicity of meanings and definitions and interpretations, nuances of those words. So I ask myself all the time, are we communicating? Are we speaking to, at, with one another? Are we, in fact, talking past one another? And I think that's true. And I think the truth is that all of us have voices in our heads which must, in such a scenario, other voices outside of those voices in our head must compete for mind share. And so we have this contest of wills always occurring. And that's why I appreciate music and other types of language arts. Because I think in truth, these are the types of language which may unite us more than divide us, ultimately.
Well, is there like an official dialect of the English language that's codified into the legal system of the nation that, you know, because of the subtleties of that dialect, many of us don't understand, you know, and those who do understand, obviously, gain power and authority over us because they do have an understanding of that official variation of the English language. How would you address that one?
Well, I will tell you this. As it relates to the law, there can be no doubt that there is such a thing as the Bar Association, which in fact has become a predatory influence in our lives. And I always say that they don't own the English language. And I always suggest that when we engage in contractual arrangements, trading relationships with others, that we consider things like counter-economics or autarky. And then we consider also oral contracts as opposed to written contracts as a means to escape from contract bondage. And so this is what I have decided to do in my own life for at least the past 7 years, is incrementally, step by step. I'm not so bright. I wanted to develop my own economy, and I wanted to define my own well-being in a way that was simple and was easily replicable. I know that when I define well-being, I have to start with a dictionary. I look at words like well, wellness, wealth, health. And then we get into other words like peace, serenity, happiness, pleasure, etc. But we always must, with well-being, define what are those things necessary or needful, and separate them from those things which are merely desirous or wants. And the same with that word economy. I frankly can't stand to hear what other people have to say about the economy or economics, because I know darn well it's really just all blather that was somehow inculcated into a fertile mind in some university somewhere.
I've got to say, I agree with you on that one. I agree with you on that one. I keep hearing all these economic pundits talking about how the Dow Jones did this and the Dow Jones did that, and frankly, I'd be a lot more attuned to what they were talking about if they'd say, well, eggs did this, milk did that, gasoline did that. Those are the important economic indicators to a simple fellow like me. Dow, what the heck is Dow?
Yeah, and I never got into things like day trading and stock market and all that kind of stuff. So I have to admit that I'm a failure when it comes to the capitalist system.
Economics to me are, I need to buy a tank of gasoline. My God, how much is it going to be this week?
Well, really, all it is addressing resources that are needful first, desirous second, and then the actions that one takes to secure those resources. Because after all, what are we after? We're looking to efficiently and ergonomically manage our own households. A household can be defined as that which resides inside one's own skin. As we are not turtles, it could be actually some kind of a dwelling, which is what I presume you're in right now.
Yes, I'm in my secret underground bunker, just 12 miles south of Ground Zero. But
that's right.
It's funny. I sometimes feel like I'm a hamster on a wheel, because I got to have a car so I can get myself to work, so I can earn enough money so I can pay for the car that I need to get to work, so I can earn enough money so I can afford to pay for the car. And, it seems like, I'm a hamster on a wheel.
Well, but see, that's the whole purpose of socialization and social engineering. An interesting word is this word engrenage. It's a French term, but I learned it from an attorney in Atlanta who writes about education policy. And her name is Robin Eubanks. Her website is Invisible Surf's Collar, like a shirt or a dress.com. She explained that this word, spelled E-N-G-R-E-N-A-G-E, engrenage, means gearing. Like you see two gear wheels in motion. Imagine the windings of a Swiss watch. Well, see, all of us are products. We're moving products, in a sense, in the system that we live in. And we are part of those windings. And the people who construct those watches are the social engineers, the behaviorists, the sociologists, the philosophers, the priests, philosopher kings, if you will. And those ideas from academia are translated and then put into a hierarchical kind of an order, or a systematic kind of a way, in the same way that gearings or the windings of a watch are put together. And so all of us are compartmentalized. We are made to be hamsters, because in this technological age, this information age, once we can be replaced, we become obsolete. Anyway, so what I have sought to do is to not be continually that same hamster, because I recognize that same metaphor as being myself. I was the hamster in the wheel. And I had to ask myself, well, what is wealth actually? Is this what life is all about, to be a hamster in a wheel? Well, I don't think so. I think there's more of that. And I'm as someone who's lost my entire nuclear family way too young, I had to ask how it is that members of our society could actually be turned into criminals. Now, we see this with people who join trade associations. For example, the American Medical Association, the American Bar Association. I don't think most of those folks had really bad intentions before they decided to go into such career fields. Do you?
I don't think so. They probably actually thought they were going to do something good,
something noble. But what happens is in truth, with this thing called the standard of care, with this Affordable Care Act, these allopathic physicians and these nurses have actually turned themselves into instruments of the socialist state, which I term the communitarian state, because that is the variant of socialism, combining corporatism, capitalism, mercantilism, or free trade with communism, as well as Christian communism and Christian socialism, because these ingredients have been part of the American fabric from the beginning.
And Lark, this is one of those areas where, I think you and I disagree a little bit. I look at all these isms out there, and I really have tried to wrap my head around all these various isms. You got your communism, and you got your capitalism, and you got your socialism. But, on closer examination, every one of them has one thing in common. There is a small minority that are in control of the means of production and the vast majority of the wealth, and then there's everybody else. And whether it's capitalism, communism, socialism, or what else, they all have that same pattern in common. Now, how you going to address that one, my friend?
Well, I think it goes to the reality of the hamster. We have to look in the mirror, and we have to ask ourselves, well, what role, what part do I play in this thing called engrenage, which metaphorically signifies the inevitability of events? Because that's what it means. The inevitability of events. And I liken it to this Marxian interpretation of history, or philosophy of history, which is brought about primarily via the Hegelian dialectical process. A natural phenomenon, we're presented a problem, we seek a solution. And oftentimes these problems are manufactured outside of ourselves, and we adopt them uselessly. And then, too, there's this thing today which is a variant of communitarianism. And you can find it at my website, LarkInTexas.blogspot.com, titled Just an American, under the sum of all things. That would be the first one. because I'm up to number 4 now. But there are lots of isms that contribute to this thing called communitarianism, which is simply a school of thought. It is the variant of socialism which is in vogue today. The worst aspects of socialism, and in some sense, the very best aspects of socialism. But it all is tantamount to contract bondage. But with scientism, you have science rules. And in a scientific world, you have to do away, according to the many scientists, you have to do away with things which are not scientific, things like morality or even immorality. And so they've opted for something called amorality. So we leave this out of the equation. What is communitarianism is little more than a scientific dictatorship of the community. Now, I know this thing called an ism or school of thought is disagreeable to most folks. And for many years it was to me too. But I have learned not to be afraid of such things. Because in any school of thought, there's going to be differences of opinion. Where we lean over the abyss is when we take these things which are termed science, the learned consensus of scientific opinion, so-called, and we replace the deductive logical process that we know through the scientific method, and we replace it with something called inductive logic, which is where we manufacture the solution to a problem in advance, and then we fit the facts to suit the policy direction. This is, in fact, what socialism is, and this is the role that scientism, another ism, plays in such a process. And this is how we as individuals and society at large goes from being a free person or a free people to one who is enslaved. Now, did that make any sense at all?
Well, I'm still looking at all these isms, and you know they're
troublesome to you. Are they troublesome to you?
They keep waving this communism at me like it was some kind of boogeyman. You know, oh, there's communism hiding under your bed. You better look every night before you go to sleep tonight because there's communism hiding under your bed. And when I really look at communism, it's really no different than capitalism. There's going to be some schmuck who's lording over all the rest of us, and you know.
You're so right. You're so correct.
So I mean, I'm looking at all the all these isms, and it don't matter which one of these boogeymen they decide to rule me by. I'm going to be ruled by one or the other. So what the heck does it matter to average Joe schmuck?
Unless you first step outside the dialectic. Decide who it is that you are, and address the contracts by which you are bound. Make sense?
Well, then we get into that contract thing, and I was always told that if you signed a contract with somebody who was mentally deficient, we don't say retarded anymore, we say mentally deficient, that it was not a binding contract because obviously this person had no understanding of what they were signing. There is this thing called informed consent. And I don't believe that any of these social contracts that I have been fooled into signing are really valid because, frankly, they could not have possibly been signed with informed consent. And you were fraudulently induced. Exactly. As far as I'm concerned, these contracts are fraudulent. I have been defrauded, and I want to know who can I take my claim to.
Well, and then just look at all the folks who may, in fact, feel the very same way that you and I do, who are caught up in the system. I identified another variant, or shall I say, an ingredient of communitarianism, and that is this thing called syndicalism. A typical syndicalist is merely a trade unionist or a member of a trade association. My goodness, all the governors, the National Governors Association, are members of syndicalist groups. The mayor's the same. And many of the blue-collar workers who are in trade unions of sorts, many white-collar workers are also in syndicalist organizations. And so what does membership bring to the individual who seeks to be independent? But conformity, consensus, compromise at every turn. Many times these groups are led by facilitators. Public school teachers, college and university professors are all syndicalists. Government bureaucrats, U.S. military personnel, law enforcement personnel, doctors, nurses, hospital administrators, lawyers, attorneys, counselors at law, judges, politicians, their staffs, insurance agents, and bankers. Now, we would call these the pillars of our community, wouldn't we?
Some would.
But in fact,
Lark, I'll tell
they
you,
are all communitarians. That's the truth.
At this point, I do have to put my producer hat on you and remind you that you only have about 1 minute left, actually a little less than 1 minute, about 48 seconds to do some blatant self-promotion. You did mention your website, but I would encourage you, for folks who might like to catch a little bit more of what you've been discussing, tell them where they can find out more about it.
Well, I'd be happy to do that. You can find me very easily, LarkINTexas.blogspot.com. You can reach me, lark@gmail.com. I'm a hermit, so I love interaction with other people. But I do study this thing called communitarianism because it is the basis for what we call community law. And it is the law, also known as communitarian law, which undergirds what we popularly call the New World Order.
And Lark, on that note, I'm going to have to cut you loose, man.
Well, I appreciate your interaction very much.
These 30-minute segments go mighty short, but it is that time. Thank you so much, Lark in Texas. You take care now.
Thank you.